It hurt. Not the kind of pain that fades after a moment. Not the kind you can hide behind a smile. This pain lived inside her bones. "I can't move," she whispered, her voice trembling as tears slid silently into her hair. Elena Carter lay on the cold marble floor of the palace corridor, her body curled slightly, like something fragile that had been dropped and forgotten. The palace was never meant for someone like her. It was a place of power, of immortality, of monsters who ruled the night. And she was just a human girl. A nobody. Her fingers twitched weakly against the polished stone. Every breath stabbed her ribs like broken glass. Her uniform, the gray servant dress she wore every day, was torn at the shoulder, stained dark with blood. She shouldn't have come here. She knew the rules. Human servants were invisible, silent, replaceable. They were never allowed near the royal chamber. But she hadn't had a choice. Her legs had carried her there on instinct alone, step after painful step, climbing endless stairs while her vision blurred and her lungs burned. Because she knew, if she didn't reach him now, she wouldn't survive the night. Behind the towering obsidian doors ahead was the War Council chamber. And inside was the Vampire King, King Lucian Veyne. His name alone was enough to make immortals bow and enemies disappear. He was older than most nations, stronger than any creature alive, feared even by his own kind. And Elena had just collapsed at his door. Her cheek pressed against the cold floor as darkness threatened to pull her under. Maybe this was how it ended. Not with justice. Not with dignity. Just silence. Footsteps echoed. Low voices. Then, silence. The massive doors slowly opened. Elena heard them before she saw them. The quiet stillness that only powerful beings could command. 4 vampire nobles stood inside the chamber, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. And at the center of them, he stood, King Lucian. He was taller than she imagined. Broad-shouldered, dressed in black that seemed to swallow the light around him. His dark hair framed a face carved with sharp, inhuman perfection. He didn't move at first. He simply stared. His crimson eyes fixed on her broken form. She tried to speak, but only a weak sound escaped her lips. "It hurts." The words were barely audible. But to him it was louder than thunder. The nobles shifted uncomfortably. One of them spoke quietly. "She shouldn't be here, Your Majesty." Another added coldly, "Shall we remove her?" Elena squeezed her eyes shut. She knew what that meant. Remove her. Dispose of her. Erase the problem. Her body trembled as she waited for the end. But it never came. Instead, footsteps approached her. Slow. Controlled. Deliberate. She felt his presence before she saw him. Then suddenly, the king of vampires knelt beside her. The entire chamber froze. No one spoke. No one breathed. Because kings did not kneel. Especially not for humans. Especially not for servants. Lucian's hand hovered over her, not touching, as if afraid she might break. His voice when he spoke was low. Dangerous. "Who did this to you?" Not angry. Not yet. But close. Elena's lips trembled. She tried to answer, but her strength was fading too quickly. Her vision blurred. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was his face. Not cruel. Not hungry. But something else. Something she never expected. Concern. When Elena woke again, she was no longer on the floor. She was in a bed. A massive bed, softer than anything she had ever felt. Silk sheets covered her. Warm blankets protected her fragile body. She panicked instantly. This wasn't the servants' quarters. This was somewhere else. Somewhere forbidden. A calm voice spoke beside her. "Do not move. Your injuries are severe." She turned her head slowly. A woman stood nearby, elegant and pale, dressed in dark medical robes. "The royal physician," the woman explained. "You have 3 fractured ribs, internal bleeding, and severe blood loss." Elena's heart raced. Royal physician? Royal? Her eyes moved past the doctor. And froze. He was there. Standing near the window watching her. King Lucian. He hadn't left. He stood in silence, his expression unreadable. Elena tried to sit up immediately. "I'm sorry," she whispered weakly. "I shouldn't be here, please don't punish me." His voice stopped her. "You are not being punished." It wasn't loud, but it was absolute. She looked at him, confused. He stepped closer. Every movement was controlled. "Careful. You are safe here." Safe. The word felt unreal. Impossible. No one had ever said that to her before. His eyes studied her face, searching. "What is your name?" he asked. She hesitated. Names had never mattered before. But somehow this moment felt different. Elena, she whispered. He repeated it quietly. Elena. The way he said it made it sound important, valuable, human. And in that moment something shifted. Not in the world. Not yet. But in him. Because for the first time in centuries, the Vampire King was no longer looking at a servant. He was looking at her. And he would soon learn the truth. The truth about the girl everyone had broken. The truth about the pain she endured. And the truth that would change his kingdom forever. Because the next thing he would do would break everyone, including himself. Elena had never known silence like this before. Not the fearful silence of servants pretending not to exist. Not the suffocating silence of pain. This silence was different. It was calm, safe, and it terrified her. She lay still beneath the silk blankets, her breathing shallow as the reality settled in. She was inside the private chamber of King Lucian Veyne, the most feared being in the immortal world. Humans weren't allowed here. Humans weren't even allowed to look him in the eyes. And yet, he hadn't left. He stood near the tall arched window, his back partially turned, staring out over the vast city below. The night skyline shimmered with silver lights, hidden beneath layers of fog and secrets. He looked like part of the darkness itself. Ancient. Untouchable. But he had knelt for her. That thought alone made her chest tighten. The royal physician finished adjusting the bandages around Elena's ribs with gentle precision. You were fortunate, the physician said calmly. Another hour, and your organs would have begun to fail. Fortunate. Elena almost laughed at the word. Nothing about her life had ever been fortunate. The physician stepped away and gave a respectful nod toward Lucian. She needs rest. And safety. Lucian's voice was quiet but firm. She will have both. The physician hesitated, then left the room, closing the door softly behind her. Now Elena was alone with him. Her heart pounded painfully. She stared at the blanket, afraid to look directly at him. I'm sorry, she whispered. The words slipped out automatically. Years of training. Years of survival. Sorry for existing. Sorry for bleeding. Sorry for being weak. Lucian didn't respond immediately. He walked toward the bed slowly, his footsteps silent against the polished floor. Why are you apologizing? He asked. She swallowed. I caused trouble. I interrupted your counsel. I broke the rules. His expression hardened slightly. You did not cause this. His eyes moved to the bruises on her arms. The fading fingerprints. The marks of violence that had been hidden for too long. Someone else did. His voice dropped lower. Tell me who. Fear wrapped around her throat instantly. Her fingers clenched the blanket. She couldn't say his name. If she did, he would find out. And when he found out, he would kill her. Like he always threatened. Lucian noticed the change in her breathing. The panic in her eyes. His jaw tightened. You are afraid, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was a realization. And that realization ignited something dangerous inside him. Anger. Not the explosive kind. But the controlled, terrifying kind. The kind that kings carried. Elena, he said gently, and the softness in his voice shocked her. No one will harm you here. She wanted to believe him. She really did. But fear had been her master for too long. He said no one would care, she whispered. Lucian froze. Who said that? Her lips trembled. The head steward. Marcus. The name hung in the air like poison. Lucian's eyes darkened instantly. Marcus. He knew him. Trusted him. Allowed him to oversee the human staff. And suddenly pieces fell into place. The injuries. The fear. The silence. How long? Lucian asked. Elena hesitated. 2 years. The words nearly broke her. Lucian didn't move. Didn't blink. But the temperature in the room dropped. Explain, he said. Her voice shook. He said humans owed a blood tithe for protection. He said if we didn't give it willingly, he would take it. Her fingers trembled as she pulled the blanket aside slightly, revealing older scars along her arm. He always took it. Lucian stared at the scars. Each one a crime committed under his rule. Under his protection. A low, dangerous energy filled the room. Not chaotic. Not wild. Controlled. But deadly. He had built this kingdom to protect both vampires and humans. He had sworn it. And someone under his command had turned it into a nightmare. His fists clenched at his sides. Elena, he said carefully. Why did you come to me? She hesitated. Because the truth sounded foolish. Because hope was dangerous. Because I didn't want to die without trying, she whispered. The words hit him harder than any weapon ever could. She hadn't come to accuse. She hadn't come to demand justice. She had simply come to survive. Lucian sat beside the bed slowly, his movements deliberate, careful not to frighten her. "You will not die," he said. It wasn't comfort. It was a promise. She looked at him then. Really looked at him. Into his ancient, inhuman eyes. And for the first time, she saw something unexpected. Not cruelty. Not hunger. But guilt. Heavy. Real. "I failed you," he said quietly. Her eyes widened. Kings didn't say things like that. Kings didn't admit failure. But he did. And somehow that made him more terrifying. And more human. Lucian reached toward her slowly. He didn't touch her. He simply placed his hand beside hers on the blanket. Close enough to protect. Far enough to respect. "No one will hurt you again," he said. His voice carried the weight of centuries. The weight of absolute authority. "I swear it." Outside the chamber doors, guards began moving. Orders were already being given. The palace was waking. And somewhere inside it, Marcus still believed he was untouchable. He didn't know yet. He didn't know that the girl he broke had just been protected by the most powerful being alive. And when the Vampire King finally stood to face justice, no one would be able to stop what came next. Because Lucian Veyne did not forget. He did not forgive. And he never broke a promise. Elena had never worn silk before. The fabric felt foreign against her skin, soft and cool, nothing like the rough gray uniform she had lived in for 2 years. The deep midnight blue dress covered her arms and shoulders, hiding the scars she didn't want the world to see. But nothing could hide the fear inside her. Her hands trembled as she stared at her reflection in the tall mirror. She didn't recognize herself. She didn't look like a servant. She looked like someone important. And that frightened her most of all. Behind her, the chamber doors opened quietly. "You are ready." Lucian's voice filled the room. Elena turned slowly. He stood there, dressed in black ceremonial armor, the symbol of the royal bloodline etched in silver across his chest. He looked less like a king and more like something ancient. Something unstoppable. His crimson eyes softened slightly when he saw her. Not with desire. With respect. "You do not have to do this," he said. The words surprised her. "You can remain here. No one would question my command." He was giving her an escape. A way to avoid the pain. But Elena shook her head. Her voice was quiet but steady. "If I stay silent, he wins." Lucian studied her carefully. This fragile human girl who had been broken, beaten, and silenced for years was choosing to stand. Choosing to face her fear. Choosing truth. Something inside him shifted again. Not pity. Not obligation. Something deeper. Pride. He stepped aside and offered his hand. Not to command, but to guide. Elena hesitated only a moment before placing her trembling hand in his. His skin was cool. Steady. Safe. And together they walked into the royal court. The throne chamber was massive. Hundreds of vampires filled the room. Nobles. Generals. Council members. Creatures older than human history itself. And at the center, chained to the floor, was Marcus, the head steward, the man who had tortured her. His once pristine uniform was torn, his face pale with panic. His eyes darted wildly as he saw her enter, as he saw who stood beside her, the king. A murmur spread through the court. Confusion. Disbelief. Lucian Veyne never appeared publicly with humans. Yet here he was, walking beside one. Protecting one. Marcus's voice broke the silence. "Your Majesty," he cried desperately. "This is a mistake. She's lying. She's just a servant." Elena flinched. The sound of his voice alone made her chest tighten. Lucian's hand tightened slightly around hers. Not forcefully. Reassuringly. Marcus continued, his voice frantic. "She's weak. Worthless. She's trying to manipulate you." Lucian's eyes turned toward Marcus slowly. And the entire room fell silent. Because they had never seen that expression before. It wasn't rage. It wasn't fury. It was something far worse. Disappointment. "You abused my people," Lucian said quietly. Marcus shook his head violently. No. No, I served you faithfully. I obeyed every order." Lucian stepped forward, placing himself fully between Marcus and Elena. "You disobeyed the only order that mattered." His voice echoed across the chamber. "Protect the innocent." Marcus's face twisted. "She's human," he spat. "She's nothing." The moment the words left his mouth, the air exploded. A violent force slammed Marcus into the floor. He screamed in agony as invisible pressure crushed him. Every vampire in the room froze. They felt it. The king's power. Unleashed. Lucian's eyes burned crimson. Not the controlled red of royalty, but the red of something ancient. Something deadly. Elena Carter, Lucian said, his voice calm again as he turned to her. Speak freely. You are under my protection. The entire court stared at her. Hundreds of immortal predators. Watching. Judging. Waiting. Elena's heart pounded violently. Her instincts screamed at her to run. To hide. To disappear. But she couldn't. Not anymore. She stepped forward. Her legs trembled. Her voice shook. But she spoke. He took our blood, she said. The words echoed. He hurt us. He threatened us. He said no one would care. Marcus screamed, liar. Lucian didn't even look at him. Elena, Lucian said softly. Continue. She swallowed hard. There were others. Many others. Some disappeared. Gasps filled the chamber. Even the nobles looked disturbed. Lucian turned toward his guards. Bring the evidence. A guard stepped forward and placed a ledger before the throne. Names. Dates. Amounts. Proof. Marcus's face went white. There is nothing you can say now, Lucian said coldly. Marcus fell to his knees. Please? Mercy. Mercy. The word meant nothing now. Lucian looked at Elena. Not for permission. Not for approval. But to make sure she was safe. Because this moment was not about vengeance. It was about justice. You used my authority to create suffering, Lucian said. His voice carried absolute finality. For that, you are stripped of rank. Stripped of protection. Stripped of mercy. Marcus screamed as guards dragged him away. His fate sealed. His power gone. His cruelty ended. The court remained frozen. Not because Marcus had fallen, but because of what they had witnessed. Their king had chosen a human, protected a human, stood beside a human. Lucian turned to Elena. She was shaking. Not from fear, but from release. 2 years of pain. Finally spoken. Finally heard. You did well, Lucian said quietly. No one had ever told her that before. She looked up at him. And for the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, valued, protected. And in that moment, the entire kingdom realized something had changed. Not just for her, but for everyone. Because the Vampire King had chosen compassion. And compassion was more powerful than fear. The kingdom had not slept since the trial. Whispers moved faster than wind through the palace halls, slipping beneath doors, curling through shadows, spreading into every corner of vampire society. The king had chosen a human. Not just spared one. Not just protected one. He had stood beside her. Elena Carter. Her name, once meaningless, now carried weight, power, and danger. Elena felt it immediately. Even from inside Lucian's private chambers, she could sense the change. The air itself felt different. Heavier. Watching her. Servants who once ignored her now stared. Some with sympathy. Some with fear. Some with hatred. She sat near the tall window, wrapped in a soft shawl, watching the distant city lights flicker beneath the night sky. Her ribs still ached, but the deeper pain lived somewhere else. Inside her chest. Inside her thoughts. She didn't belong here. She knew it. This wasn't her world. She had spent her entire life surviving in silence. Invisible. Powerless. And now, she was the center of everything. The chamber door opened quietly behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know it was him. Lucian's presence was unmistakable. The air itself seemed to move around him. You should be resting, he said. His voice was calm but softer than it used to be. She gave a small, tired smile. I've done enough resting. He stepped closer, stopping a respectful distance away. He had always been careful with her. Never invading her space. Never forcing his presence. It was a strange kind of kindness. One she was still learning to trust. The council is divided, he said. She looked down. I caused that. No, he corrected gently. You revealed it. She didn't respond. Because part of her still believed the truth was a burden. Lucian studied her quietly. He had faced wars. Betrayals. None of it had unsettled him like this. This human girl, fragile and wounded, had changed something fundamental inside his kingdom. Inside him. They fear change, he said. She finally looked at him. And you don't? He was silent for a moment. Then he answered honestly. Yes. The admission surprised her. You're the king, she said quietly. You're not supposed to be afraid. He gave a faint, humorless smile. Kings fear the most, because every decision shapes the lives of others. She had never thought of it that way. To her, power had always meant control, not responsibility. A knock interrupted the silence. Lucian's expression hardened instantly. Enter. The door opened and one of his royal guards stepped inside, kneeling. My king. Lady Seraphine requests an audience. Elena noticed the subtle shift in Lucian's posture. Tension. Something dangerous. Denied, Lucian said immediately. The guard hesitated. She insists. She claims it concerns the stability of the throne. Lucian's jaw tightened. Elena didn't know who Seraphine was, but the name alone felt heavy. Important. Ancient. Lucian looked at Elena briefly. Not with fear. With calculation. Send her in, he said finally. The guard bowed and left. Moments later, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The door opened slowly, and she entered. Lady Seraphine. She was beautiful. Inhumanly beautiful. Tall. Pale. Perfect. Her silver hair fell like liquid moonlight over her shoulders. Her crimson eyes glowed faintly with quiet power. She wasn't just any vampire. She was royalty. Ancient. And dangerous. Her gaze immediately locked onto Elena. Not curious. Not confused. Disgusted. So, Seraphine said softly, this is the human. Her voice was smooth, elegant, and sharp enough to cut. Lucian stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between them. This is Elena Carter, he said calmly. Seraphine raised an eyebrow. You speak her name as if it matters. Lucian didn't respond, which somehow was an answer. Seraphine circled slowly, her movements graceful and predatory. Elena Carter, she repeated. Do you understand what you've done? Elena's throat tightened. I told the truth, she said quietly. Seraphine's smile was cold. The truth destabilizes order. Lucian's voice turned firm. The truth strengthens justice. Seraphine's eyes flicked to him. And justice weakens control. Silence filled the room. Ancient tension. Ancient disagreement. Seraphine stepped closer to Elena, her gaze piercing. You are fragile, Seraphine said softly. Temporary. Mortal. Each word felt like a warning. You will age. You will weaken. You will die. Lucian's voice cut through the air instantly. Enough. Seraphine turned to him. You protect her as if she belongs here. Lucian didn't hesitate. She does. The words shocked everyone, including Elena. Seraphine studied him carefully. Then she smiled. Not kindly. Not warmly. Knowingly. You are changing, Lucian, she said. He didn't deny it. Her gaze returned to Elena. Be careful, human, she whispered. Power attracts enemies. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she paused. When she becomes your weakness, Seraphine said quietly, they will use her against you. The door closed behind her. Silence returned. Elena's hands trembled slightly. She hates me, Elena whispered. Lucian's expression softened. She fears what you represent. Elena looked up at him. And what do I represent? Lucian answered without hesitation. Change. Outside those walls, forces were already moving. Allies were choosing sides. Enemies were watching. And for the first time in centuries, the Vampire King had something to lose. Because protecting Elena Carter was no longer just an act of justice. It was becoming something far more dangerous. Something personal. Elena woke to the sound of breathing. Not her own. Slow. Controlled. Watching. Her eyes opened instantly, her heart jumping into her throat. The chamber was dark, lit only by faint moonlight spilling through the tall glass windows. Shadows stretched across the walls like silent predators. She didn't move. Didn't breathe. Her survival instincts, sharpened by years of fear, screamed one warning. She wasn't alone. A faint shift in the darkness confirmed it. Someone was inside the king's private chamber. Her fingers trembled as she slowly turned her head. At first she saw nothing. Then, movement. A figure detached itself from the shadows near the far wall. Tall. Inhuman. Crimson eyes glowed faintly in the dark. A vampire. But not Lucian. This one felt different. Colder. Crueler. Predatory in a way that made her blood freeze. Well, the stranger whispered softly. You don't look very special. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She tried to scream. But the vampire was faster. He crossed the room in an instant, his hand clamping over her mouth, his grip like iron. Quiet, he murmured. This will be quick. Terror exploded inside her chest. She struggled, her injured body weak and slow. He leaned closer, inhaling her scent. And yet, he said softly, he protects you. His fingers tightened around her throat. Not enough to kill. Enough to remind her how easily he could. You've made the king vulnerable, he whispered. Her vision blurred. Her lungs burned. This was how she would die. Not in chains. Not in silence. But in the king's own room. Alone. Helpless. Forgotten. Suddenly, the door exploded open. The force shook the entire chamber. The attacker froze. Slowly he turned. And his expression changed. Fear. Lucian stood in the doorway. But he didn't look like himself. His eyes burned pure crimson. Not controlled. Not calm. Feral. Ancient. Terrifying. The air itself seemed to bend around him. Release her. His voice wasn't loud. But it wasn't human. It was something deeper. Something older than language. The attacker laughed nervously. My king, he said. I was only correcting a mistake. Lucian stepped forward. No, he said quietly. You are making your last one. The attacker shoved Elena aside violently and lunged. Fast. Deadly. Ancient. But not fast enough. Lucian moved. Not like a man. Like a force of nature. He intercepted the attacker midair, slamming him into the stone wall with such force that the entire chamber cracked. The sound was deafening. Elena collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air, her body shaking uncontrollably. She could barely see through her tears. But she could hear it. The sound of Lucian's rage. Pure. Uncontrolled. The attacker struggled, but Lucian held him effortlessly. You entered my sanctuary, Lucian said. His voice vibrated with lethal calm. You touched what is mine to protect. The attacker sneered weakly. She is only human. Lucian's eyes burned brighter. She is under my protection. Those words carried absolute finality. The attacker's confidence shattered. You would risk everything, for her? Lucian didn't hesitate. Yes. And then, he ended it. Swift, decisive, merciless. The attacker's body fell lifeless to the floor. Silence followed. Heavy. Breathing hard, Lucian turned immediately. Not to the body. To Elena. She was curled on the floor, shaking, her breathing uneven, her eyes wide with shock. He crossed the room slowly, carefully. Elena, he said softly. She flinched. Not from him. From everything. He stopped a few feet away, giving her space, giving her control. You are safe, he said. Her lips trembled. You lost control, she whispered. It wasn't an accusation. It was fear. Lucian froze. Because she was right. He had lost control. For the first time in centuries. Because he had been afraid. Afraid of losing her. I failed, he said quietly. She shook her head weakly. No, she whispered. You saved me. He knelt slowly. Not as a king. As someone who cared. He didn't touch her. Didn't force comfort. He simply stayed. Present. Steady. Real. Her breathing slowly stabilized. Her eyes met his. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of losing him. Why? She asked softly. Lucian didn't pretend not to understand. Why do you protect me? He could have said duty. Could have said justice. Could have said responsibility. But kings did not lie. Because you matter, he said. Her eyes filled with tears. No one had ever said that to her before. Not once in her entire life. Outside the chamber, alarms began to sound. Guards rushing. Voices shouting. The kingdom was waking again. Another attack. Another threat. Another reminder. She was no longer invisible. She was a target. Lucian stood slowly. His expression changed. Not cold. Not distant. Protective. Resolute. This will not happen again, he said. Not a promise. A vow. He turned to leave, then paused. Elena, he said quietly. She looked up. You are not weak. And for the first time in her life, she believed it. Because the most powerful being in the world had risked everything to prove it. The kingdom did not recover from the attack. Fear spread faster than truth. A vampire had broken into the king's private chamber. A vampire had tried to kill the human girl. And the king had killed one of his own to protect her. For centuries, Lucian Veyne had ruled with absolute control. Absolute discipline. Absolute emotional distance. But now the kingdom had seen something it had never seen before. The king had acted out of personal fear. Not political strategy. Not royal duty. Fear of losing her. Elena Carter. And that terrified them. Because a king with something to lose was a king who could be broken. Elena stood near the balcony, staring at the endless city below. The lights flickered like fragile stars, beautiful but temporary. Like her. She wrapped her arms around herself, her thoughts heavy. She didn't belong here. She never had. The attack had made one thing painfully clear. She was not safe. Not because she was weak, but because she mattered to him. And that made her dangerous. Behind her, Lucian stood silently. He had been watching her for several minutes. Not as a king watches a subject. As a man watches someone he cannot afford to lose. "You are thinking of leaving?" he said quietly. She froze. He always knew. She turned slowly, her eyes filled with quiet sadness. "If I stay," she whispered, "they will keep coming." Lucian didn't deny it. Because it was true. There were ancient vampires who believed humans were inferior. Who believed Lucian had dishonored his bloodline. Who believed Elena's existence was a threat. And they would not stop. Not until she was gone. Or he was. "You should not have to live in fear," she said. His voice was calm. "Neither should you." She shook her head gently. "I've lived with fear my whole life," she said. "I know how to survive it." His jaw tightened. He hated that answer. Hated what the world had done to her. Hated that survival was all she had ever known. "You deserve more than survival," he said. Her eyes met his. "And what more is there for someone like me?" The question broke something inside him. Because she still didn't see it. Didn't see her worth. Didn't see what he saw. He stepped closer. Not as a ruler. As Lucian. "You changed this kingdom," he said. She shook her head immediately. "No. I didn't." "You did," he said firmly. His crimson eyes held hers. "For centuries I believed strength meant distance. Control. Emotional isolation." He paused. "But you showed me strength can also mean compassion." Her breath caught. "You reminded me why I created this kingdom in the first place. Not for power. Not for dominance. For protection. For balance. For justice." And somewhere along the way, he had forgotten. Until her. Before she could respond, the chamber doors burst open. Guards rushed inside, kneeling urgently. "My king." Lucian turned instantly. "What is it?" "The High Council has gathered. They demand immediate judgment." Elena's heart sank. What was happening? The confrontation. Lucian had expected this. He turned back to Elena. And made a decision. One that would change everything. "Come with me," he said. Fear flickered across her face. But she trusted him. She took his hand. And together they walked toward the throne chamber. The room was filled with ancient vampires. Powerful. Terrifying. Unforgiving. Lady Seraphine stood at the center. Her expression calm. Cold. Calculated. "My king," she said. "Your actions have destabilized the natural order." Lucian said nothing. "You have protected a human above your own kind." Still he did not respond. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. "You have shown emotional attachment." Silence. The entire room waited. "This weakness," Seraphine continued, "endangers us all." Lucian stepped forward. "Elena Carter is not a weakness." His voice echoed across the chamber. Seraphine's expression hardened. "She is mortal." "Yes," he said. "She is fragile." "Yes." "She will die." Lucian didn't look away. "Yes." The admission shocked them. But he continued. "And that is what makes her life valuable." No one spoke. Because no king had ever said such words. Lucian turned, looking at every member of the council. "For centuries we have ruled through fear." His voice was calm. Controlled. Certain. "But fear does not create loyalty." He reached for Elena's hand. And held it. "Respect does." Gasps filled the chamber. Seraphine's voice turned sharp. "You would risk your throne, for her?" Lucian answered without hesitation. "Yes." The word shattered centuries of tradition. But he wasn't finished. He stepped toward the throne. Then turned. And spoke the words that would change vampire history forever. "Elena Carter," he said clearly, "is under my eternal protection." The room froze. "And by the authority of the royal bloodline." He paused. Looking into her eyes. Not asking permission. But offering something greater. "I name her queen." Silence consumed the world. Elena's heart stopped. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Queen. Not servant. Not victim. Not invisible. Queen. Seraphine stared in disbelief. The council erupted in chaos. But Lucian never looked away from Elena. Because only her reaction mattered. Tears filled her eyes. Not from fear. From something she had never known before. Belonging. I was nothing, she whispered. Lucian shook his head gently. You were never nothing. His voice softened. You were simply waiting for the world to see you. For the first time in her life. She believed it. Not because he was king. But because he had seen her when she was invisible. Protected her when she was broken. Chosen her when he had everything to lose. And in that moment, the most powerful being in existence did not stand as a ruler. He stood as someone who loved not power, but kindness, not immortality, but humanity, and the kingdom would never be the same. Because the girl who once whispered, "It hurts, I can't move," now stood beside the Vampire King, not as his servant, not as his responsibility, but as his equal.